Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping into the chilly dawn of 18th century Sweden, where the scent of lye soap curls through the frost. The rivers are half frozen but still sacred, and if you mess up your folding technique, someone's great aunt will absolutely let the whole village know. You're not just washing clothes here, you're participating in a centuries-old ritual full of rules, secrets, gossip, and municipal consequences. Yes, municipal. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always amazing to see where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a muddy track just outside a quiet Swedish village. It's early morning, but the air already bites. Your breath fogs as it leaves you. You clutch a wicker basket full of linen and wuss that's somehow both damp and frozen, which seems unfair. Ahead, a small timber washhouse leans by the river, its roof thick with snow and its chimney coughing out curls of smoke. Inside, steam rises in lazy drifts. There's the rhythmic slosh of water, the scrape of brush on cloth, and the quiet murmuring of women comparing starch strength. You remove your gloves. Big mistake. Your fingers immediately scream, but there's no turning back now. You've committed to the cleanse. Laundry here isn't a casual Saturday task with scented detergent pods. It's a serious, regulated, communal undertaking. And it starts with fear. Not of the stains, those are eternal, but of doing it wrong. Because everyone's watching. Not out of cruelty necessarily, but because, well, cleanliness is next to godliness, and godliness has rules. You step into the wash house and are immediately swallowed by heat and humidity. Someone hands you a wooden paddle without eye contact. It's carved with swirls, burnished from years of lye-splashed grip. You don't know what to do with it yet, but it feels important. A status item, maybe? Or a warning? Your eyes adjust to the murky warmth. Tubs of every size crowd the space. They sit on iron tripods above stone hearths or half submerged in ground pits lined with straw. The smell is a complicated cocktail. Soap root, boiled ash, mossy wool, and a whisper of mold. An older woman in a teal wimple eyes your basket. New? She asks, though it's not really a question. You nod. She smirks. Don't let it touch the floor. That's rule 1. Rule 2? Don't block the south-facing windows. Rule 3? Use your own brush unless invited. Rule 4? Whites go first, always. You try to find a corner near the cold end of the house. No one says anything, but you feel the glance. That's where the goat's cloth gets washed. You slide one basin to the side, a silent apology forming. Outside, the river groans under thin ice. But here the hot water sloshes like an obedient tide. Women dip, scrub, and rinse in practiced, almost ritualistic gestures. And you, the newcomer, are just now realizing this is less bathhouse and more theater. Each movement tells a story. A flick of the wrist to judge soap thickness, a sideways glance to suggest overboiling, a tightening of the apron strap. Well, no one's decoded that yet, but it's probably something. Historians still argue whether these early communal washhouses were more about hygiene or surveillance. After all, when everyone's linens hang side by side, everyone's business is laid bare, literally. And in small towns, secrets tend to drip dry, just like the sheets. A sudden shriek pulls your attention to the center basin. A younger girl yelps and yanks her hand from the lye pot. Steam swirls, someone tisks, no one rushes to help. This too is part of the learning. You're given a block of homemade soap that smells aggressively herbal. It's rough, flecked with something that might be crushed sage or might be ground up judgment. You dip your first shirt tentatively and begin to scrub. The woman in the wimple watches you for exactly 8 seconds before sighing and showing you the proper way, which involves angling the fabric, twisting at the wrist and murmuring a barely audible prayer in Old Swedish. She doesn't say what happens if you skip the prayer, you don't ask. Outside, bells ring faintly from the chapel. Inside, the rhythm continues. Water, soap, slap, rinse. You fall into it slowly. Your fingers numb, then burn, then go numb again. Time stretches. Or maybe it freezes, just like your apron did. By the end of your first hour, you've washed a single undershirt and half a sock. But it's not about speed. It's about presence, discipline, submission to the order of wool and water. And somewhere in this steam-thick temple of textile purification, you begin to understand cleanliness wasn't just cleanliness, it was honor. Reputation. And in a place where the snow lasted half the year and everyone wore layers, those layers better be spotless. The warmth of the wash house now seeps into your bones. Not in a cozy blanket on a couch kind of way, but more like how a potato feels after being slowly boiled. You're cooked but not done. Because just as you're starting to get the hang of sudsing in a way that doesn't splash the next person's stockings, a sharp voice slices through the steam. Not there! You freeze. A middle-aged woman in a deep indigo cap taps her paddle on the floorboards next to your feet. That basin belongs to the Falkvist sisters. You blink. You weren't trying to take anyone's basin. You just leaned a little. But here, leaning without permission is apparently a form of civil disobedience. Hierarchy in the wash house is a quiet, brutal ballet. It isn't posted on any wall or marked with nameplates, but it's felt. Understood. The best spot near the hearth? That's for the matriarch with 7 children and a husband who doesn't wash anything, ever. The corner by the window, reserved for the midwife, who always arrives with linens that smell of cloves and tension. And the south basin? The one you naively thought was neutral territory? That's the kingdom of the Falkvist sisters. No one tells you who they are at first. You figure it out the way you'd identify queens at court, by the ripple effect. Every woman around them subtly adjusts posture. Buckets are nudged a few inches farther away. Conversations hush just slightly. Even the steam seems to part more neatly in their direction. They're tall, wiry, wrapped in russet shawls and move with military precision. They don't just wash, they command. One of them folds with terrifying symmetry. The other one scrubs so quickly you start to wonder if her brush is enchanted. You retreat without argument and pretend it was intentional. Rule 5. Don't get involved in basin politics unless invited. And trust us, you won't be invited. Over the next half hour, you start to see just how deep the pecking order goes. Buckets aren't interchangeable, they carry legacy. A cracked-handled ladle, probably borrowed. A polished birch soap stand. Family heirloom. That towel with the embroidered edge. A wedding dowry, repurposed for scouring tablecloths. Nothing here is just functional, it's all symbolic, coated in fabric and soap. You overhear a hushed conversation between 2 younger women folding linens on the far bench. One lowers her voice. She didn't pre-soak before the Saints' Day last week. The other gasps as if someone had suggested bringing mud into the communion cup. Historians still debate how much of this wash-house hierarchy reflected broader Swedish society and how much was invented in the moist confines of these wooden walls. Some believe it was a holdover from older guild-like structures. Others argue it was more primal, a microcosm of survival instincts, dressed in aprons and starch. Meanwhile, you try to keep your head down, and your brush dry between uses, which is apparently Rule 6. You lose count of how many unspoken regulations you've broken, but you've also made a tiny bit of progress. One woman near the back gives you a half smile, or a twitch. Could be gas. Either way, it feels like a win. It's hard not to notice that the labor itself is intense. Wrists strain, backs ache, steam stings your eyes, and occasionally, a board creaks ominously under shifting weight. No one stops. These women have developed stamina that would shame a modern gym class. But there's also rhythm here. You begin to hear the tempo of the work. The rise and fall of soap-drenched sleeves, the low hum of breath, the splash of rinse water poured with a practiced hand. If you listen close enough, it almost becomes music. A damp, soapy symphony. And then come the sounds of dispute. Quiet ones, of course. No one yells in the wash house. That would be crass. But someone clears their throat a little too loudly. Another woman scrubs harder than necessary, splashing intentionally. A third mutters, in a tone that could mean anything from bless your heart to I hope your towels mildew. You learn fast that everything in this room means something. The way you place your brush, the angle of your elbow, the thickness of your soap film, even the sequence of your scrubbing matters. One fringe account from a Swedish diarist notes that deviating from the 3-stroke rinse pattern could get you side-eyed into oblivion. Laundry here isn't just about getting things clean. It's about reinforcing social order. The wash house is where grudges bubble just below the surface, and where forgiveness is doled out in silent nods or carefully shared lie. You begin to mirror the others more closely. Dip, scrub, twist, rinse, pause, check, breathe, repeat. Someone passes you a spare cloth. No words, just a hand extended and a nod. You thank them softly. It's a moment of grace, and you cling to it like a damp sock on a drying line. By the end of the morning, your back aches, your hands are pickled, and your shirt clings in unflattering ways. But you're still here. You haven't been ejected. You've even earned space, just a sliver, between the midwife and the stern-faced woman with the cleanest cuffs you've ever seen. And that's when it hits you. In this steamy, rule-laden chamber, you've started to belong. Not entirely, not yet, but you're on your way. You step outside for a breath of air, your lungs grateful, your shirt somehow wetter than when you were inside. The washhouse doors creak shut behind you, and now the smell of soap gives way to morning mist tinged with smoke from the chimney stack. You can still hear the faint sloshing of buckets, the scrape of paddles. But out here, the air is sharper, cleaner, and it carries the faint aroma of pine and potatoes. Classic 18th-century Sweden. You settle on a flat stone nearby, careful not to drip on your only halfway dry apron. And just as your back begins to loosen, a cart rumbles past. Not a dramatic storybook cart, no one is galloping anywhere, but a slow-moving, mud-splattered two-wheeler filled with folded linens and one fairly disgruntled goat. You nod politely to the man guiding it. He doesn't nod back. Which is fine. You're invisible again. A temporary citizen of the washhouse class. But that cart has paperwork. Because one of the quirks of laundry life in 18th century Sweden was how very regulated it was, and not just in the washhouse. If you wanted to move laundry between town, say from your own estate to your aunt's across the lake, you'd need documentation, travel permissions, log entries, possibly a wax seal if your uncle was important enough. That's right, laundry moved under the watchful eye of the crown. You watch the cart disappear into the mist, linen bundles bouncing gently. Historians still argue whether these transport laws were about disease control, class control, or just someone in Stockholm having too much time and not enough starch. But the fact remains, laundry was considered a serious matter. Back inside, that seriousness takes on new life with the rinse cycle. Though, of course, no one calls it that. They just shift to the rinsing troughs. Long wooden channels where garments are dipped again and again until even the lye has waved a white flag. Your own rinsing technique? Lacking. You try to copy the woman to your right. She dips with a gentle wrist flick that makes her sleeves billow elegantly. You do the same and splash half a basin onto your knees. Smooth, but rinse you must. Because if there's one thing worse than dirty linens, it's soapy linens. And if your clothes dry with soap still clinging, you'll hear about it. Not loudly, of course, but in whispers. Maybe a raised eyebrow at church, possibly a cluck from an aunt. There's even a fringe report, probably exaggerated, of a household being denied social visits for a full month after their table runner dried with residue streaks. Sweden in 1760, harsh on detergent crimes. The rinse trough is also where some of the more elaborate items get attention. Lace cuffs, embroidered caps, aprons with secret initials stitched in silk thread. These don't just get dipped, they get finessed. One woman gently rolls her daughter's christening gown in boiled flax water, murmuring something like a prayer. You stare a second too long, then quickly go back to your own sad pile of shirts. And then you hear it, the sound of scissors. You glance over and see one of the Falkvist sisters, probably the elder, trimming a loose thread from a sleeve. Nothing flashy, just a small, precise snip. But it holds the gravity of a final judgment. Because altering clothing in public, even a thread, was its own performance. It said, I know what I'm doing. I am both laundress and tailor. Watch me work. Your own thread? Let's just say you tuck it in and pretend it was never there. Soon the rinse water grows cloudy and someone begins the quiet process of emptying and refilling the trough. A wooden bucket brigade forms and you're tapped, literally on the elbow, to join. No words, just a brush of fingers and a pointed look. You take your place. The water sourced from a nearby well is frigid. Each splash into the trough sends up little clouds of steam, and the contrast of hot and cold makes the wood groan softly beneath your feet. You pass buckets down the line, rhythm forming again. Scoop, carry, pour, return. It's like being in a very damp symphony, and you are, perhaps, third flute. No solo, but necessary. There's an open scholarly debate about how these collective labor rhythms contributed to a stronger sense of social cohesion in rural Scandinavian communities. Some anthropologists suggest that the repetitive, shared nature of tasks like this created an unspoken language, one of loyalty, timing, and mutual understanding. Others claim it was more about surviving the tedium without strangling anyone. Either way, it works. You return to your spot, now a little more accepted, a little less clumsy. One of the older women offers a nod that might mean, well done, or you didn't ruin anything. Either is fine. Then, from the corner, a small drama unfolds. A younger girl, maybe 12, maybe 13, accidentally tips a basin. Water spills across the floorboards, soaking 2 folded towels and one particularly vocal pair of clogs. There's a sharp intake of breath from several corners. The girl looks stricken. But before any tension can curdle, the midwife steps forward, lifts the basin with one hand, and hands the girl a dry cloth with the other. She says nothing, just restores order. The ripple of judgment still hangs, but it never breaks into full rebuke. There's something beautiful about that, you think? Mistakes made, mistakes handled. No flogging with soap ropes. And as the morning sun pushes higher, golden slats of light begin to pierce the steam. The washhouse becomes a cathedral of warmth and work. You feel for the first time a little proud. You are wet, slightly scalded, and very wrinkled. But you're learning the rhythm. Laundry in 18th century Sweden, it turns out, wasn't just about rules. It was about rhythm. The dance of doing it together. And maybe, just maybe, the smallest threads of joy stitched into every clean shirt. Your hands are numb now, but you don't really mind. They've moved beyond pain into that strange, floaty stage of damp resilience, where you could probably wrestle a walrus and still fold napkins afterward. Around you, the washhouse begins to change pace. The intense scrubbing has slowed, the urgency replaced by careful wringing, final rinses, and the ritual that separates novices from the truly initiated, the hanging. Outside, the linen fields stretch wide under a sky that can't decide if it wants to drizzle or merely threaten it. Long wooden frames stand in rows like gentle gallows, crossbeams stacked with rope lines that sag ever so slightly under the weight of hundreds of soaked garments. You're about to meet them. Armed with a woven basket, you join the procession of washerwomen moving out into the crisp air. The steam clings to your clothes even here, trailing behind like a reluctant ghost. And then, with slightly shaking fingers, you begin to pin. Not just anywhere. Oh no, there are rules. You see, 18th century Sweden had hanging regulations so specific, so strangely obsessive, you'd think laundry was a military maneuver. In many towns, you were only allowed to hang your linens in designated plots, each marked by invisible boundaries that everyone just knew. Step across into another family's drying space, prepare for glares, gossip, and the kind of passive-aggressive silence that echoes louder than church bells. Some towns even kept official drying schedules, rotating who could hang their laundry on which day. Miss your turn? Too bad. You'd have to wait, wash again, or, worst fate, try drying inside, which usually meant mildew and a minor scandal. You hang your first piece, a long, slightly yellowed undershirt that smells like boiled thyme and dignity. It flops with the elegance of a wet pancake. But it's up there. Victory. A woman next to you nods. Encouragement? Possibly. Or just wind-induced blinking. There's a fringe theory among Swedish historians that these strict drying laws weren't just about order, but about aesthetics. That a neatly aligned row of crisp linens communicated not just cleanliness, but moral character. In other words, hang your socks haphazardly and people might assume your soul was equally tangled. You shift a sheet along the line, careful to align the corners. There's a certain peace in it. The repetition. The weight of fabric slowly easing down as water drains into the thirsty earth. Somewhere nearby, someone hums a lullaby. Minor key, of course, because this is Sweden. The wind picks up a little, causing rows of shirts and aprons to flap in synchronized waves. It looks like a strange, silent choir mid-rehearsal, arms raised in linen praise. You'd clap if your fingers weren't busy wrestling clothespins. As you reach for another towel, a question crosses your mind. Who makes all these pins? Turns out, pin making was its own little cottage industry. Families would carve pegs during the long winters, whittling from birch or spruce, then trading bundles of 20 for eggs, bread, or the occasional story. It's said that one village's entire dowry exchange was once settled in hand-lathed laundry pins, a fact historians still squint at, unsure if it's folklore or deeply niche economics. You snap a pin into place and pause to stretch your back. Across the field, someone is laying out pillowcases on a sun-warmed plank, pressing them flat with a smooth river stone. No iron, just stone and sunlight. The pillowcases lie obediently still, like content little ghosts basking in the afterlife. Suddenly you hear a warning hiss. Rain. Everyone looks up. Now this part, it's war. You see, one of the cruelest tricks of Northern European weather is its complete disregard for your drying schedule. You might have planned perfectly, followed the rules, checked the skies, even bribed a neighbor for extra line space, but the clouds don't care. The moment that first drop falls, the washhouse turns from serene cathedral to panicked drill site. Women move fast. Linens are unpinned, folded, bundled, rescued from grass and mud. You leap into the fray, fumbling to gather what you've just hung. Your arms fill with warm fabric, the basket pressing into your hip. It smells of soap and something vaguely herbal. Maybe juniper. In the scramble, someone drops a chemise, which is promptly trampled by 2 wooden clogs and 1 unbothered chicken. Its fate is sealed. Not everything survives the rain. Back under the eaves of the wash house, there's muttering, a few sighs, and the delicate act of pretending no one is frustrated. You glance down at your own haul, wrinkled, damp again, but mostly salvageable. You've seen worse. And judging by the looks of solidarity around you, so has everyone else. Historians still debate whether these rainy interruptions helped foster community ties, shared disappointment, mutual rescue, or just confirmed everyone's suspicion that the weather gods had a mean streak. The air hangs heavy with ozone now. Raindrops patter on the shingles above. The washhouse breathes a collective breath. Then, nothing. The rain stops. A single bird chirps as if to say, "Just kidding." You look around. No one moves. No one dares. It could start again. This is a weather bluff. The old women know. They're waiting. So you wait too. And in that stillness, that moment of damp indecision, you realize something. Laundry in 18th century Sweden wasn't just labor. It was life rehearsal. Timing, rules, teamwork, occasional tragedy, and moments of quiet triumph. The sun reappears. Slowly, cautiously, the hanging resumes. You reach for the next shirt. You're not sure if it's the sun or your own stubbornness, but you're back at the line, pinning with renewed purpose. The air is heavy from the brief rain, but your linen is once again flapping like sails on a ship going nowhere fast. Every crease you smooth, every corner you straighten, it all feels like part of a quiet ritual. And that ritual is about to take a turn toward the sacred. Because today, on this very afternoon, you're witnessing what may well be one of the most serious events in the entire 18th century Swedish washhouse calendar. The linen inventory. You've seen the signs, a woman in a dark blue apron holding a narrow hand-bound ledger. Two others trailing behind with stacks of pressed sheets, all folded into perfect rectangles as if geometry were a requirement for cleanliness. These are the counters, the checkers, the judges of your domestic soul. See, every household of note, every parsonage, merchant's house, or middling farm, kept detailed records of their linens. How many tablecloths, how many towels, how many pillowcases stitched with which initials. Losing one wasn't just careless, it was cause for suspicion. Was it stolen? Was it gifted without permission? Did you dare bury it with Uncle Rolf? You watch the procession like you're watching tax auditors enter a bakery. The woman with the ledger stops near a drying frame, dips her quill into a tiny horn of ink tied to her belt, and begins to write. The linen is lifted, unfolded, examined. She sniffs it once delicately, then refolds it. One of her assistants nods solemnly. You imagine your own ragged towel under that level of scrutiny. You imagine it failing dramatically, bursting into flames from shame. Historians still debate whether these inventories were actually about hygiene or just another way for 18th century households to flex. Like saying, we have 14 napkins with scalloped trim, and we know where every single one is. Either way, the power of the linen list was real. There's even one surviving account from a vicarage in Uppsala where a maid was dismissed for misplacing a single guest handkerchief. Though, in her defense, the guest had used it to wrap a sandwich and never returned either. And speaking of handkerchiefs, the folding technique used here is unlike anything you've seen. Each square is creased with thumb and forefinger into an exact quarter of its size, then pressed flat with a warm slate stone. The motion is swift, precise, reverent. It's like watching someone perform origami with steamed bread. Your own folding, by contrast, looks like someone angrily wrestled a napkin and lost. But no one comments. That's the washhouse way. Quiet judgment, maybe, but rarely spoken. The silence here is thick but gentle. You can feel people watching, but not in malice. More like training. As the linen counters pass on to the next line, you resume your folding. This time, slower. You mimic their rhythm. Thumb, forefinger, edge aligned. A loose crease. Flatten. Stack. There. Better. Someone passes behind you with a basket of clothespins, dropping a few as she walks. You bend to help gather them, only to find yourself nose to nose with a tiny wooden object, carved into the shape of a fish. A fish clothespin. Whimsical and utilitarian. Turns out decorative pins were a little cottage craft in some rural areas. Small animals, crosses, initials. One old superstition held that a carved fish pin would keep linens from being stolen by crows. Do crows steal linens? Historians still argue. But fish pins remain. You pocket one discreetly. Not to keep, just to admire. It feels like carrying a piece of someone else's patience. As the sun dries your sleeves, a new smell begins to drift from the edge of the field. Smoke, but not fire. This is controlled. Intentional. You follow your nose and spot two women crouched over a flat iron plate, warming soapstones over coals. Pressing time. While most of the linen dries in the open air, certain garments, shirt collars, bodice trims, baby wraps, are pressed while still faintly damp. The heat seals the shape. And in some circles, especially wealthier homes, a crisply pressed cuff was as important as a polished shoe. It spoke of order, discipline, very clean wrists. You crouch nearby and watch. The stones are lifted carefully with cloth pads, then rolled across the fabric in long, slow strokes. No harsh presses, just the weight of heat and time. One of the women glances up and offers a small, weary smile. "Like ironing a cloud," she says. You nod, not daring to speak. You want to believe your face says, "I get it," and not, "I'm trying not to sneeze from the smoke." There's a peculiar joy in this moment. The chatter has faded to murmurs. The breeze is just strong enough to make the linen dance again. The pressing goes on. And then someone tells a joke. You can't catch all the words, too fast, too local, but it involves a bishop, 3 missing nightshirts, and an angry goat. The punchline hits, and there's a ripple of laughter. Software contained, but laughter all the same. It doesn't happen often. Humor here is usually reserved for winter gatherings or the back pew at church. But sometimes under the sun, amid the scent of soap and burning birchwood, even laundry invites a chuckle. You laugh too, late and confused, but no one minds. The linen inventory continues. The folding persists. The pressing smooths everything flat again. And you keep learning the rhythm. You've officially lost feeling in your forearms. Not in a dangerous way, just in the way that only comes from repetitive, oddly dignified labor. Fold, lift, stretch, pin. Fold, lift, stretch, pin. Your fingers feel like they've memorized the movements better than your brain. The smell of pressed linen now coats your skin like perfume. And oddly, that's sort of the point. Because as your drying line flutters gently beside the others, the laundry itself becomes a kind of display. And what you're displaying, whether you realize it or not, is your character. This was a very real thing in 18th century Sweden. Laundry didn't just get clean, it got seen. Your linen line was a public announcement of your values, your status, and, if you were careless, your personal failures. Shirts too yellowed? Sloppy? Sheets not matched in width? Careless. Undergarments fraying at the hems? Embarrassing. Heaven help you if anyone spotted a missing tie or a collar that had clearly been chewed by a goat. Not that that ever happened. Probably. One surviving letter from a housemaid near Gothenburg describes how her employer would walk the perimeter of the drying yard every Wednesday afternoon, silently judging each line like a royal inspection. She never said anything aloud, but if your pillowcases disappeared the next day, you knew you'd failed the test. Historians still debate whether this kind of scrutiny was limited to the upper classes, or if even peasant farms had their own low-stakes laundry pageants. There's one argument that drying fields functioned as proto-communal bulletin boards. Clean laundry as coded messages. Who had guests, who was expecting a baby, who was late on their laundry schedule, and therefore probably overwhelmed or ill. You glance at your own row of clothes and realize that it's not bad. Mostly straight, mostly matched. Slightly uneven socks, but you pretend that's a statement on individualism. The wind picks up again and a pair of undertrousers nearly flings itself into the stream. You leap, grab it just in time, and glance around. No one saw, except the linen inspector. She gives you a very small, very amused nod. You return it with a shrug that says, "It's been a long day, even for the trousers." Laundry in this setting is deeply gendered, though not entirely in the way you might expect. Women did most of the work, yes, but men participated too, especially when strength was needed. Hauling water, chopping soap root, beating the heavy carpets, managing the larger pressing tools. And sometimes, especially in smaller households, everyone did a little of everything. But make no mistake, certain items were off limits to prying male eyes. There's a story passed down through the Northlands about a curious farmhand who accidentally glimpsed his mistress's chemise on the line and had to spend 3 days sleeping in the goat barn as penance. Whether he minded depends on how affectionate the goats were. You return to your basket and find a last handful of cloths that need laying out. Mostly smalls. Things that don't catch the wind easily and don't demand the same pageantry as the larger linens. But you treat them with care, just the same. Because here's something strange. The more you work, the more the rhythm becomes soothing. Like kneading bread or walking a well-worn path. It doesn't matter if your hands ache, you're in the flow, in the cycle. And the rules, those oddly strict rules, start to make a sleepy kind of sense. Like the rule about not hanging your wash too close to another family's line. It's not just about space. It's about privacy. Boundaries. You don't want your linens getting overly friendly with someone else's bloomers. Or the rule that all wash water must be returned to the ground before sundown, or you risk offending the spirits of the river. At least, that's how the superstition goes. More likely, it was just a way to make sure the community didn't have to deal with floating soap scum the next morning. Still, and you pour your rinse bucket carefully into the earth behind the trees, just in case. Nearby, someone is humming. A tune so old you can't tell if it's a lullaby or a folk song, maybe both. The melody rises and falls like the fabric lines above it. It's wordless, but full of memory. You sit on a stump for a moment, rubbing your wrists. A small girl trots past, barefoot, holding a wooden ladle and a crumpled dishcloth. She's clearly on a mission. You nod at her like fellow laundry operatives. She doesn't nod back. She's focused. Across the yard, a pale yellow cat has taken up residence on a pile of clean sheets. A woman approaches with a broom and shoos it gently. The cat stares back, unmoved. Eventually it leaves, but not without a long, languid stretch of protest. Cats, it seems, have never respected laundry law. Here's a quirky detail for your sleepy mind. Some 18th century Swedes believed that placing dried lavender sprigs between folded sheets could prevent nightmares. Others swore by rosemary or fennel seeds. You make a mental note to try all three, and maybe add mint, just to cover all bases. The sun is lower now. Shadows stretch across the drying green. The smell of lye and wool has faded, replaced by something earthier. Damp grass and cooling stones. You take your last linen square, fold it with a sigh, and look over the yard. Nothing's perfect, but nothing's ruined. And in this oddly strict, oddly soothing system that feels like a win. You stretch your back, glance at your fingers, red, wrinkled, but proud, and wonder if you've earned a break. A break and maybe a lavender pillow. There's something satisfying about folding cloth that's still sun-warm. It bends softly under your fingers, corners aligning with the obedience of muscle memory. You stack each piece neatly, pausing every so often to smooth a crease that wasn't quite ready to surrender. By now, the other washgoers have settled into that familiar late-afternoon rhythm. Some still pinning the last of their linens, others chatting over low stone basins, buckets at their feet. Someone sneezes and a few heads turn, not an alarm, but in the quiet, collective recognition that laundry and allergies go hand in hand. You find yourself drawn to the tall figure by the oak tree. An older woman with sleeves rolled high and a jaw set like she's personally offended by stubborn stains. She's wielding a scrubbing board like it's a holy relic, whispering a low stream of advice to the girl beside her. Not commands exactly, more like inherited wisdom, passed down through soap and steam. In 18th century Sweden, it wasn't uncommon for laundry skills to be taught as early as 6 or 7. Young girls learned which herbs soften linen, like which water temperature best released butter stains, and which days were best for washing based on the position of the moon. Yes, the moon. Because why not add a touch of lunar precision to your undergarment routine? You once heard that during a full moon, wash water held less grudge, whatever that means. Historians still argue whether lunar-based laundering advice was rooted in genuine folk science or just a poetic excuse to avoid cold water after sunset. You shift slightly and glance at your own stack. Respectable, if slightly uneven. No visible moon influence, but then again, it's a waxing crescent tonight. You hope that means good fortune for sock pairings. A boy runs past carrying a bar of soap the size of his head. Behind him, a woman shouts something that sounds suspiciously like, "Don't you dare drop it," which he immediately does. The bar bounces once, leaves a white streak across the grass, and vanishes into a nearby bush. You offer silent condolences. Soap, in this time and place, was a strange hybrid of chemistry and storytelling. The most common base was lye, made from ash soaked in rainwater and carefully strained through birch bark funnels. Into that, you might mix tallow, marrow, or rendered fat. Not glamorous, but efficient. And scented soap? Well, if you were rich enough, you could add mint, rosewater, or even dried citrus peel. But for most households, the scent of clean was simply the absence of barn. There's a fringe story recorded in a coastal village about a local priest who banned the use of rosewater soap during Lent, claiming it tempted vanity. Supposedly, the women responded by using lavender instead. Quietly defiant, delightfully fragrant. You lean closer to your bucket and catch a whiff of pine tar, a signature Swedish cleaning scent, robust enough to make your eyes water and your neighbors respect you, or avoid you. It's a fine line. Now let's talk etiquette, because laundry had rules far beyond sorting lights from darks. You didn't wring someone else's cloth, even if it was tangled with yours. You never commented on another's undergarments, no matter how bold the embroidery. And if you stepped on someone's drying sheet, prepare to atone with fresh butter and an apology carved into rye crisp bread. There was also an unspoken code about song. Laundry songs were common, but only if sung at the right volume with the right tone. Too loud, and it was considered boastful. Too soft, and you risked sounding mournful. You aim for the middle and hum a tune you don't fully know, just enough to suggest you're part of the rhythm. The woman by the oak tree joins in, just a few bars, before returning to her lecture on the proper folding technique for handkerchiefs. You pretend not to listen while absolutely memorizing every word. Handkerchiefs were more than just nose blotters, by the way. They were tokens, gifts, mourning cloths, engagement signals, and, on one recorded occasion, used in place of a lost marriage contract. If the stitches are honest, one widow reportedly told a magistrate, then so was our union. You smile to yourself and return to folding. Another detail that's hard to ignore, and how clean laundry became a measure of time. Certain linens were only washed at harvest's end. Others, like funeral shrouds, were washed once, stored in cedar boxes and never touched again. Clean cloth marked beginnings and ends, celebrations and departures. And some fabric was washed not for wear, but for ritual. In one village tradition, a mother would wash her newborn's first swaddling in snowmelt and bury the rinse water near the oldest tree on the property. A gesture of welcome and maybe of protection. The light shifts again. Soft gold now, slanting long shadows across the ground. Your fingers ache in that satisfying end-of-day way. Not pain, just the kind of dull hum that says, you did something. Someone nearby begins gathering pegs, counting them aloud in a sing-song voice. Another woman shakes a blanket with theatrical flair, sending a puff of lint into the air like confetti. And you smooth your last folded shirt, press your palm flat over the top of the stack, and exhale. Done. Not perfect, not pristine, but honest. Cleaned with effort, folded with care, compliant, for the most part, with the invisible codes of laundry civility. You glance around and notice others packing up too. No one rushes. The folding, the lifting, the carrying, it all happens at half speed, as if faster movement might disturb the fabric gods. The woman by the oak gives you a nod. You return it. Your basket is heavier now, not with dirt, but with a kind of earned softness. Cloth that has survived the boiling, the scrubbing, the sun. And you with it. You sling the handle over your arm, feel the tug at your shoulder, and step back toward the path. The line behind you sways gently in the breeze, like it's waving farewell. Laundry complete. Reputation intact. Maybe even a little local legend made today. The walk home is quieter than the trip out. And not just because your arms are sore from lifting that laundry basket like it's a wool-filled ark. The village path winds gently through reeds and low brush, and every now and then a scrap of linen pinned too loosely catches the wind and flaps like a lazy ghost. It's a parade of freshly washed fabric, all of it behaving better than your knees. Behind you, the wash house murmurs on. Soft splashes, the shuffle of buckets, a laugh rising above the steam. But ahead? There's only the soft crunch of your footsteps and the occasional caw of a crow who frankly looks judgmental. You pass a small cottage where someone's drawn a chalk line along their fence post. It's not for decoration, it's the village signal that tomorrow's drying area is claimed. Laundry plots were like tiny temporary real estate deals. If you didn't mark yours early, you might be left hanging, literally. Some places even had cloth-sharing guilds. Not as dramatic as it sounds. No secret meetings or velvet robes. Just a group of households who agreed to rotate drying space and water buckets, often governed by the eldest woman on the street, who knew everybody's stain history and wasn't afraid to bring it up. Historians still argue whether these guilds function more like civic groups or informal matriarchies. Either way, if you cross them, your linen might mysteriously never dry again. You trudge forward and catch sight of a small wooden sign tacked to a tree. It's hand-painted, slightly tilted, and reads, "No hanging on Sundays." A remnant of the church's firm stance on rest, though some villagers got creative by airing their sheets without technically drying them. And yes, that semantic loophole was debated for years in one rural parish, where a pastor allegedly wrote a sermon titled, "The Moral Weight of Damp Undergarments." You finally reach the edge of your own little plot, the one with the slanted clothesline that sags slightly under the weight of ambition. You set the basket down and stretch, spine popping in protest. Then you pause because something isn't right. One of your neighbors is already hanging their wash. On your line, there it is, a neatly wrung apron fluttering gently. The cloth is innocent. The act? A quiet challenge. You take a breath. Deep, level, Swedish. Because this was one of those moments that laundry laws, yes, actual laws, were designed to prevent. In 18th century Sweden, there were localized regulations about shared washing areas. Not just customs, actual municipal codes. Some towns required permits for washhouse access. Others published schedules in the village square. And in particularly organized parishes, a ledger was kept detailing who had washed what and when. Fail to follow the rules? You might be fined. Or worse, publicly corrected during Sunday announcements. Imagine having your woolen misconduct read aloud between psalms. One fringe case tells of a man who repeatedly hung his trousers on the bishop's hedge. After 3 warnings, he was sentenced to a week of public washing duty, forced to clean every stray sock in the village while seated on a stump dubbed the soak seat. No word on whether it cured him of his hedge-hanging habits, but the stump still bears a faint dent. Back to your situation. You approach the line slowly like it might bolt. The apron sways. Its owner, a wiry man with strong arms and no concept of boundaries, spots you and raises a hand in a casual greeting. "Didn't think you'd be back so soon," he says. You nod politely, then pick up your laundry basket and begin pinning your own items. Not angrily, not passive-aggressively, just firmly. He watches for a moment, then shrugs and shifts his wash to a nearby tree branch. Truce achieved. You both return to your routines. The wind picks up slightly, and a shirt sleeve brushes your face like a sleepy high five. You adjust the clothespins, spacing them just so. There's a quiet pride in this. Not because it's art, not because it's revolutionary, but because it's done right. In these small rituals, pinning, spacing, repinning, we carry forward centuries of habits. The kind of traditions so old they've forgotten they were ever new. Cloth hung at dusk carries a different scent. It gathers more dew, softens in ways morning sun never manages. You remember reading that in some villages, it was believed that moonlight sweetened fabric, especially if it passed through the elderberry leaves. No one agrees on why, but no one dares challenge it either. A woman passes by, nods at your setup, and offers a single approving word. Even. It's the laundry equivalent of a 5-star review. You continue hanging, and your thoughts wander. To the days when laundry wasn't just practical, it was strategic. There were reports of rival families competing through laundry presentation. The brightest whites, the flattest folds, the quickest drying time. One woman supposedly boiled her linens in goat's milk and vinegar to win the Midsummer Linen Display Contest. Her sheets glowed for 3 days. Her husband, unfortunately, smelled like salad for a week. Some say these rivalries kept communities sharp. Others say they were thinly veiled competitions for social standing. Historians still argue whether laundry excellence led to better marriage prospects, or just better gossip. You finish the last cloth and stand back, surveying the line like an artist viewing their canvas. There's a rhythm to it. Big to small, heavy to light, practical to delicate. Even the breeze seems to respect the effort. The fabrics flutter gently, no longer wild but rhythmic, like sails waiting for a journey you're not taking. You sit beside your basket and let the weight of the day settle into your spine. It's not just about cleanliness, it's about order. About reclaiming something from the chaos of damp fabric and too many rules. And in this quiet patch of sunlit calm, you begin to understand why laundry of all things needed laws. Because it wasn't really about the clothes, it was about the people. There's a certain stillness that comes after everything's hung. You don't move for a while, you just sit there, squinting into the flutter of shirts and skirts, watching the sunlight filter through damp threads like stained glass made of cotton. Your hands smell faintly of lye soap and cold river water. Your knees ache. But your soul? It's airing out a little. The village begins to shift as people head back indoors. It's the afternoon lull. Too late for washing, too early for supper. A woman 2 cottages down is smoothing the folds in her linens with a piece of polished bone, murmuring to herself as she works. Next to her, a child is balancing a bucket on their head like a circus act, wobbling precariously. You lean back, propped against the laundry basket, and try to recall the exact wording of the drying ordinance posted on the chapel door last spring. Something about no overlapping cloth, uniform pin spacing, and respecting communal airflow. Yes, airflow. There were literal air maps drawn for some streets. Schematics to optimize breezes between rows of houses. Historians still argue whether these maps were based on real meteorological observation or just the idle doodles of a bored priest with access to ink and far too much free time. Either way, the rules stuck, and they were enforced. In one 18th century town, a woman was reprimanded, publicly for hanging her husband's trousers, too close to a neighbor's underthings. The scandal wasn't the garments themselves, it was the implication. Overlapping fabric meant overlapping lives, and in small towns? That was basically emotional trespassing. You glance back at your own line, the spacing is decent. You even allowed for that western breeze the old washerwoman always talks about. She calls it the wind that folds your sheets for you. Though, frankly, it mostly just smacks you in the face when you're not paying attention. Someone walks by, an older man, hands behind his back, posture stiff with ritual. He pauses for exactly 3 seconds to inspect your hanging technique. Then he continues on. That pause? That was a silent performance review. You've passed. Probably. The sun shifts slightly, lengthening shadows. You know the cloth will dry unevenly if you don't adjust the pins soon, but for now, you just watch. The steam has left your skin. The buzz of bathhouse camaraderie is far behind you now. It's just you, your line of fabric flags, and the invisible social maze of a Swedish laundry village. It's worth remembering that laundry in this era wasn't just a domestic task, it was political. A woman's ability to keep garments spotless, mended, and well-dried could influence how she was spoken of in church pews and marketplace corners. One crooked hem might mark you as disorganized. A visible stain, reckless, mildew, you might as well exile yourself. There's even a fringe diary from 1746 where a farmer describes his neighbor's laundry sins in great detail. She pins from the bottom up, which invites devil's breath, he writes, and she folds before the last corner has dried. Madness. You begin to gather your drying stick, a long curved pole used to adjust high clotheslines without dragging a ladder through the mud. Yours has a small notch carved into it, passed down from someone's grandfather. These sticks, too, had etiquette. You never borrowed one without asking, and never, ever used it to poke someone else's laundry. That was a punishable offense in at least 3 recorded parishes. One town held a public stick ceremony each spring, where elders would bless the drying poles and repaint any markings. Local children got to carve flowers or initials into them, like medieval graffiti, but wholesome. You reach up with the stick and respace a heavy linen sheet, easing its sag. It catches the light just right, and for a second it looks like a sail. You imagine what it'd be like if laundry day really was a voyage. Each towel an oar, each sock a compass, and your washboard a rudder steering you toward domestic glory. Across the field, someone's dog barks. A crow calls back. You ignore both. Because now comes one of the strangest, quietest laundry rituals of all. The sit and wait. Not the drying. That's mechanical. Time plus wind plus sun equals dry. No, the sit and wait is the social phase. The, I'm clearly not watching your laundry dry, I just happen to be sitting here phase. It's a village chess game. You wait. Others wait. Eyes flick toward the lines. Who takes theirs down first? Who leaves it overnight? Who folds it there on the spot? Every choice speaks volumes. You remain still. You are unreadable. You are laundry zen. Eventually, a woman across the way removes a scarf, folds it, nods. The signal ripples outward. Within minutes, clotheslines begin to empty. You rise slowly, feeling about 80 years old. Each cloth you take down is folded with care. Not rushed, not sloppily. This is the final act of the day's performance. The applause is silent but felt. The fabrics are dry, yes, but more than that, they're affirmed. They've passed through ritual, scrutiny, and breeze. They are now suitable to return to closets and bodies and Swedish conversations that begin with, "You'll never guess who folds before cooling." You pause on the last towel. The one that gave you trouble earlier. The one that tried to leap into the stream. It's soft now, warm, obedient. You smile and fold it neatly. Laundry in 18th century Sweden wasn't always about soap or steam or stains. It was about proving you knew the rhythm of your world, that you could move in time with the expectations of a quiet, stern, yet oddly poetic society. And maybe, just maybe, that you could hang your shirts in a straight enough line that the crows would stop judging you. Evening slips in without a fuss. The sky shifts from pale brass to a shade of blue that feels like velvet soaked in ink. You've taken everything down now, folded, stacked, and stored in a woven basket that creaks under the weight of a day well spent. Your hands are red and raw, but your mind is quiet. There's one last task before you're officially released from duty. The fire kettle. You trudge around the side of the house, basket balanced on your hip, and find the old iron pot hanging from its soot-blackened hook. A low bed of coals glows beneath it. Still warm. You add a few dry sticks and fan it gently, sending up a lazy plume of smoke that curls like a question mark into the dusk. In 18th century Sweden, heating laundry water was often a full-day ordeal. Entire communal hearths were dedicated to the task. But at home, it was a quieter, slower ceremony. You kept the kettle simmering just in case something still needed soaking. A stubborn stain, a pair of socks someone forgot to mention earlier. Or, more often, just for the ritual of it. One last swirl of warmth before night set in. You add a scoop of ash to the pot. It softens the water. That's what your grandmother swore anyway. Historians still argue whether ash truly altered the pH enough to affect the fabric, or if it was just superstition that stuck around because it gave people something to do with all that leftover soot. Either way, it smells comforting. The fire crackles softly, a private lullaby. A few stars blink overhead. You sit beside it, knees hugged to your chest, and watch the flame reflect off the metal basin. For centuries, this was the closest most people came to a television. Just heat and shimmer, shadows dancing on a pot. A nearby window creaks open. Someone inside calls out about a dropped clothespin. You retrieve it, of course you do, and hand it over like a knight returning a holy relic. Then comes the soap ritual. Not the scrubbing kind, no, that's long done. This is the sorting and shaving phase. You pull out the round, slightly lopsided lump of homemade lye soap and a small wooden rasp. With slow, practiced strokes, you carve soft curls into a box, ready for next time. Each curl smells like birch tar and pine resin, and a hint of honey. Not sweet, exactly, just honest. Laundry soap wasn't uniform back then. Some households swore by animal fats, others by plant oils, still others by secret combinations passed down like witchcraft. There are court records even of neighbors accusing each other of scent theft, claiming someone had copied their soap's aroma to trick suitors or confuse dogs. You don't know your soap's exact recipe, but it works. And that's enough. The coals snap again, sending a tiny ember into the dark. You blink slowly, fighting the pull of sleep. Not from exhaustion, though you are that too, but from something softer. A kind of settledness. Like you've synced with the rhythm of a life that, while inconvenient and mildly damp, also makes a strange amount of sense. There's a phrase scribbled in the margin of one 18th century housekeeper's journal. Laundry is the memory of cloth. No one's sure what she meant exactly. But you think of all the stories held in these garments. Weddings, illnesses, spilled soup, hard winters, clumsy first dances, and it clicks. Clothing is just the record. Laundry is the interpretation. You place the soap curls into their jar, seal the lid with a twist of cloth, and stand. The fire's done its job. The water is still hot. And tomorrow, if someone falls in the mud, or a chicken decides to decorate a hem, you'll be ready. Back inside, candlelight flickers through small, leaded windows. You can hear laughter now, distant and soft. Maybe someone telling a story. Maybe just the sound of dishes being stacked. You step inside. The air is warm and someone's left slippers by the hearth. Your slippers. You'd forgotten them. You kick off your damp boots and slide in, sighing like someone returning from war. The smell of bread lingers, dense rye loaves from earlier in the day. In the far corner, someone is carefully turning collars back to right side out and placing them into drawers lined with dried herbs. You nod. Folded, fragrant, filed. The laundry cycle is complete. And here's the funny part. No one claps. No one applauds the perfectly dried shirt or the successfully reblued collar. There's no medal for most efficient rinse, or least splashy wringer. But in this quiet room, where every towel has its place and every clothespin is accounted for, you feel a strange pride. Laundry wasn't glamorous in 18th century Sweden. It wasn't even appreciated half the time. But it was respected. It was constant. And it was yours. You stretch once, twice. Then move toward your pallet, blanket folded neatly at the corner. As you lie down, the fabric smells faintly of lye, firewood, and the breeze that crossed the drying field hours ago. It's the smell of clean, yes, but also of time well spent. You breathe in. You breathe out. And outside, on the line you forgot to check, one single sock flutters like a tiny white flag in the night. Morning comes with the quiet clatter of wooden soles on stone. Not the loud stomp of urgency. No one here rushes. But the measured cadence of someone who knows there's laundry to be reckoned with. Again. You stir in your bedroll, the scent of pine soap still lingering faintly on your sleeve, and blink into the slow dawn light filtering through oiled parchment windows. Your muscles ache in a familiar way, not sharp or cruel, just enough to remind you that you've lived fully inside your limbs. It's a wash day again. Because in 18th century Sweden, laundry wasn't a weekly ritual. It was whenever the pile outgrew the patience of whoever tripped over it. But here's the twist. Today isn't for washing, it's for inspection. Every so often, the parish would send an official. Not to judge your morals or your marriage, but your linens. That's right. A laundry inspector. Dressed in slightly too neat wool, carrying a clipboard made of polished birch, and possessing the uncanny ability to sniff out mold like a bloodhound in clogs. They didn't knock. They appeared. You sip thin barley coffee from a rough ceramic mug and wait. The door creaks open, and there she is. Inspector Britta. Her bonnet is starched, her expression neutral, her eyes already scanning your drying racks. You rise, muttering a respectful greeting, and gesture toward your folded pile. And so begins the Great Laundry Audit. In some Swedish regions during the 1700s, cleanliness wasn't just a virtue, it was a civic duty. Town councils believed that unwashed fabric spread disease, disorder, and occasionally, moral laxity. Historians still argue whether this was based on medical theories of miasma or just a convenient excuse to shame bachelors, but either way, the inspections were real. Britta runs her fingers over your pillowcases, checking for starching. She lifts a towel to the light, nods at the evenness of the weave. She peeks, into your underclothes drawer, and you suppress the urge to melt into the floorboards. There's a brief pause. Then with a tiny hum of approval, she marks something on her slate. A 7 out of 10? An invisible gold star? You'll never know. But she moves on to the drying line, outside. You follow her, half proud, half terrified. Now here's a fringe detail. In some townships, laundry inspections included scent checks. A cloth that smelled like lard could be written up. Which is especially unhelpful when your soap is made from lard. You resist the urge to explain this. You're sure Britta already knows. She sniffs once, curtly, and moves on. At the outer edge of the yard, she stops beside the lone sock from last night. It's slightly damp, slightly uneven, slightly suspicious. She raises an eyebrow. You raise both hands. Late edition, you say. She says nothing, but you sense her respect for your honesty. Or maybe just her acknowledgement that everyone has a sock they forgot once. When she leaves, it's without ceremony. No signature, no good job. Just the faint smell of vinegar starch lingering behind her, and the soft tap-tap of her shoes receding down the path. You exhale deeply. You survive the laundry police. Inside, the house settles back into itself. You pour another mug of barley brew. It's bitter and earthy and absolutely incapable of waking you up. But it's warm. And that's something. The rest of the day is yours, sort of. You're supposed to mend today because even clean clothes need love. There's a stack of shirts with tired elbows, stockings with hopeful toes, and one apron that's mostly held together by ambition and a single desperate button. You thread a needle, clumsily. It always takes 3 tries, and then you begin. Mending was more than thrifty. In 18th century Sweden, it was illegally encouraged. In some towns, citizens were fined for excessive garment disposal, which included burning or burying fabric that still bore use. This led to an entire sub-economy of re-darned stockings, patchwork undergarments, and dresses made entirely of sleeves. You stitch slowly, deliberately, not perfect, but neat. And as the cloth slips through your fingers, you notice how familiar it feels. Like braiding someone's hair. Like smoothing pages of a well-loved book. Textiles have memory. The way a collar folds, the line where a hem once was, the patch over the knee from when you slipped that icy morning 2 winters ago. Each stitch is a gentle reminder. This thing has been with you. It's earned its place. You finish one cuff and move to the next. Outside, someone whistles. A cart rumbles past. You think about the inspector again. About how much pressure was placed on people, especially women, to keep every cloth pristine, folded, documented. Historians still debate whether laundry expectations were a form of social control or simply the result of cold climates and limited wardrobes. Either way, they required time, labor, skill, and today you met those expectations. Mostly, you look at your mended pile and smile. Not because it's flawless, but because it's done. You take the last scrap of thread and tie it into a tiny loop. Something you've always done. For luck. For closure. For no reason at all. And then you place the clothes into their drawers, fold by fold, each layer a quiet defiance of chaos. Clean, whole, yours. It's late afternoon now, and the sunlight filters in with that low, sideways angle that makes everything look like a Dutch painting. Even the mop bucket. You stretch your arms overhead, bones popping gently like damp firewood, and glance toward the backyard where a few final items hang from the line, fluttering lazily. The sock made it. Barely. Today's laundry inspection is behind you, but the laundry itself is never truly done. Not in 18th century Sweden. Because now comes the part no one warns you about. Inventory. You pull out a wooden ledger, its cover smudged from years of fingers, and flip to the page labeled Household Textiles. Yes, that's a thing. Because in this world, you don't just own linens, you track them. Officially, each item, every pillowcase, shift, kerchief, and dish towel gets a line. A tally. Some households even listed the number of stitches per hem, not because they were obsessive, though maybe a little, but because losing fabric was like losing coin. In fact, cloth was currency in a way. A full-length linen sheet could be traded for salted herring, firewood, or an afternoon of labor. And if one went missing, you'd better have an explanation ready, preferably one that didn't involve mysterious gusts of wind or, "I swear it was here yesterday." You dip your pen in ink made from crushed oak galls and iron shavings, trying not to spill it this time. The ink smells sharp, like forest floor after rain, and stains everything it touches. One sneeze and your apron's ruined. You record 2 smocks, 3 towels, 1 mended apron, patched. And yes, the late entry sock. All accounted for. Now here's the fun part, marking wear levels. You could grade your laundry on a scale from practically new to should be repurposed as insulation. It's not required, but it helps when trade season comes around. Because come spring, you'll be expected to submit an updated textile inventory to the local guild, which oversees domestic economy with the sort of precision usually reserved for war planning. Historians still argue whether these household inventories were genuinely empowering, offering women a rare domain of authority, or just another tedious way to keep people busy enough not to rebel. Either way, they led to some of the best organized linen closets history has ever seen. You close the ledger and exhale, It feels good, this small sense of control. Like straightening a stack of books or sweeping a corner no one notices but you. The house may creak. The winters may threaten to never end. But for now, your linens are in order. Across the street, a neighbor shakes out a quilt. It billows like a sail catching the sun. You wonder what her inventory looks like, if her apron is patched in the same spot as yours. If she too has an inspector with eyebrows that raise in perfect judgmental arches. You return to your bench, pour a little warm water over your hands, and rub gently. The skin is dry from soap and cold air, and you make a mental note to ask about that birch tar salve at the market next week. Apparently it smells awful but works wonders. Then, thump. The door creaks open and a small child enters, holding a suspiciously soggy piece of linen. You recognize it instantly, one of the clean towels from this morning, now bearing the unmistakable signs of a berry mishap. The child looks guilty. The towel looks tragic. You don't shout, you don't scold. You sigh and reach for the lye soap again. Because laundry in this century isn't just about fabric, it's about patience. You fill a small basin, stir in ash lye, and begin the process again, gently scrubbing the stain with rhythmic pressure. It's strangely meditative. The red fades slowly like sunset retreating into dusk. You hum as you work, an old tune your grandmother used to sing while ironing sheets the size of sails. And here's the curious detail. Many Swedish households had songs specifically for washing. Not grand hymns or lullabies, but work songs. Measured, repetitive, quietly uplifting. Scholars believe the rhythms helped maintain steady motion, and the words offered just enough distraction to stave off existential dread. Yours is about a chicken who refuses to cross the road until her apron is folded. It's nonsense. It's perfect. By the time the towel is passable again, the sun has dipped lower, casting the entire yard in warm gold. You hang the towel back on the line with a satisfied nod. It won't win awards, but it's clean enough for bedtime. And that's the goal, really. Because in this little patch of Sweden, where every sleeve is cataloged and every sock has a paper trail, perfection isn't required. Just effort. And maybe a sense of humor about the fact that your soap smells like old candles and your inspector once gave you a lecture about ironing pillowcases with the seams facing east. For balance. You step back inside as the evening chill creeps in, carrying the smell of pine smoke and distant baking. Someone's making cardamom buns. You try not to be jealous, you fail, but at least your laundry is done. Mostly. The fire is low now, and the light it casts flickers like a candle trying to remember its purpose. You stir the embers gently with iron tongs, hand forge, slightly too long for comfort, and add a few pieces of birch kindling. The flames accept them with a soft crackle, like crumpled parchment unfolding in reverse. Behind you, the laundry steams quietly in its final drying stage. Not over a radiator, those don't exist yet, but on a wooden rack angled near the hearth. The clothesline outside may be good for sun drying, but for night warmth in winter, this is the method of choice. You're not the first to do this. Swedish families for centuries used these indoor racks called torkställning, crafted with slots and pegs to fit near stoves or masonry walls. Clever little inventions, the IKEA ancestors of their time. And much like modern Swedish design, they're functional, a little too efficient, and prone to making you feel inadequate when yours sags a little left. Still, your damp towel hangs nobly, and that's enough. Now, while you wait for things to dry, it's time for a little textile maintenance. You pull out the sewing basket, woven reeds, slightly cracked at the rim, and extract a spool of thread, a brass thimble, and the mending needle with the bent tip. It's your favorite. It knows the fabric like an old friend. Tonight's task? A sock with a hole the size of polite regret. You settle into your chair, lamp glow soft, needle glinting like the tiniest sword of domestic defense. The act of darning is weirdly intimate. You're essentially creating a thread lattice across a hole, weaving new strength into old fibers. It's like reinforcing the memory of warmth. And in 18th century Sweden, mending wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. Whole booklets were published on the art of repair. Some had diagrams of the ideal stitch for elbow holes. Others advised on how to color match thread using plant-based dyes like buckthorn bark or elderberry juice. One fringe pamphlet even warned against letting your children wear visibly patched garments, lest moral decay begin at the heel. Historians still argue whether that author was serious, or just had a personal vendetta against children's socks. Either way, you keep patching. The needle dives, resurfaces, in, outside, over, under. The rhythm is so hypnotic you nearly miss the creak of the house settling, wooden beams adjusting to cold, or perhaps just sighing at your stitching technique. A quiet moment stretches long. You hear distant church bells, 7 slow chimes. Not a call to action, just a sleepy reminder that the world is still out there, politely ticking along. The sock is finished, not perfect. The patch is slightly lumpy, and you suspect you may have caught the edge of your apron by accident, but it will hold, and holding is enough. You place it on the drying rack next to the others, a small lineup of fabric survivors, and allow yourself a satisfied breath. A quiet dignity hangs over the room now, stitched together with soft steam and candlelight. You made it through another day, another inspection, another surprise towel emergency. Not heroic exactly, but historically significant in its own sleepy way. And just when you think it's time to retire, there's a knock. 2 short raps, followed by 1 longer. You frown. That's the signal. You open the door to find your neighbor, wrapped in a shawl the color of old butter, holding a small basket and a look of shared suffering. She's here to borrow your lye soap. Turns out her husband, in a fit of culinary adventure, attempted to roast eel indoors, and now the curtains smell like a fishmonger's apron. You nod sympathetically and hand her the soap, still slightly damp from earlier, and wish her luck. Because this too was part of laundry life in 18th century Sweden, the communal lending of tools, materials, even morale. If someone ran out of ash lye, you shared. If their washboard cracked mid-scrub, you offered yours. And if their teenage son accidentally dyed half the linens pink with leftover beetroot juice, well, you consoled them with cinnamon bread and quiet judgment. The laundry community was real, small but mighty. You close the door again, leaning on it briefly, and smile at the absurd, unspoken rituals that govern this world. They're not written in stone, just in starch, in soap bubbles, in thimbled hands and gently humming clotheslines. You pour a little warm water into a tin cup and sip. It tastes faintly of iron and pine, but that's normal. The fire settles, casting sleepy shadows across the room. The mending basket is closed, the clothes are nearly dry. And for once, your house smells faintly, not of sweat or smoke or boiled starch, but of linen and lavender. A little reward from the universe, disguised as fabric. You exhale slowly and sit. The sky outside deepens into a woolly darkness, tinged with frost. You notice it through the warped pane of glass above the wash basin. One of the few in the village and not particularly transparent. But it's enough to know. The night is coming early, as it always does this far north. You tug your shawl tighter, a scratchy wool affair that smells faintly of cedar and long afternoons. There's one last task to complete before you can truly call the day done. Your neighbor, the one with the eel curtain disaster, has returned the lye soap. Thankfully in one piece, and she's brought with her something unexpected. A story. She sits across from you now, hands folded, a warm weight of memory in her lap. Her face is lined, not in the brittle way of age, but in the folded paper kind of way. Creases that hold stories the way laundry holds scent. She doesn't speak quickly. No one in the village does. But when she begins, you lean in. It was during his last winter, she says. The snow had already reached the window ledge by November. My husband, he always folded things, even when he was angry. Especially when he was angry. You nod, not interrupting. This is not a tale that asks for commentary. She smiles softly, looking not at you, but at the steam curling from her tea. He would fold shirts with corners so sharp you could cut silence with them. Napkins like cathedral spires, sheets with seams aligned like compass points. There's a pause, a long one. You know not to fill it. Then, the day before he passed, I found the linen chest open. And inside, stacked right at the top, was a single sheet. Just one. Folded so perfectly I didn't want to breathe on it. You imagine it now. A winter cabin with its heart torn open. And at its center, a final act of care disguised as household routine. He knew he was leaving, she adds, voice now barely above a whisper. But he didn't want me to think of it as absence. He wanted me to remember what staying looked like. You sit with that. Because in 18th century Sweden, like much of the world then, grief did not arrive with banners and black garb. It came through objects, through gestures, through the sudden awareness that your apron was still where he'd left it and folded exactly the way he preferred. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on domestic order was simply cultural conditioning or a deeper psychological strategy to manage loss in communities where death was frequent and survival required shared resilience. But as your neighbor finishes her tea, you think maybe it doesn't matter. The folded sheet is real. And so is the comfort it brought. You walk her to the door. The night wind is sharp now, the kind that feels like a stern aunt judging your posture. She disappears into the dark like a memory heading home. Back inside, you open your own linen chest. The smell of soapstone, beeswax, and a hint of past winters wafts up. You run your hand over the top layer, tablecloths, dish rags, the good hand towel you only use when guests come, all 2 of them. It's not organized like his, you suspect. Your corners are more metaphorical than geometrical, but there is care here. There is intention. And that counts for something. You pull out a plain cream-colored sheet and lay it across the table. Tomorrow you'll press it, maybe starch it if the potatoes are generous enough to spare the cooking water. But tonight you'll sleep under it. Because now, more than ever, it feels like an act of reverence. As you settle into bed, you notice the silence. Not the absence of sound kind, but the presence of peace kind. No drip from the ceiling, no goats clomping about, no distant neighbor trying to boil herring at midnight. Just linen, cool, software, and folded with your own imperfect, defiant hands. You smile. And if that folded sheet on your chest carries just the slightest echo of someone else's hands, past or present, you let it rest there quietly. Your last candle sputters once, then steadies, the flame bending toward the wood-paneled wall as if in mid-bow. You take that as a sign. Not the mystical kind, just the quiet nudge that says, we're winding down. But even now, even with sleep near, there's one more detail to consider. A final image. Not dramatic, not scandalous. Just revealing. Imagine this. A narrow alley in an 18th century Swedish town, slick with last week's snowmelt and slush. There's a laundry line stretched precariously between 2 window shutters, neither of which are doing a particularly good job of staying hinged. On the line, 1 pair of breeches, inside out. Damp. And most scandalously of all, they're swaying slightly into the street. Scandal, you ask? Oh, yes. In this particular district, under a local bylaw passed quietly in 1746, it was considered both indecent and a public invitation to gossip to hang undergarments on lines that crossed above public paths. They had to be hung in courtyards, preferably screened by lattice or high fences. because nothing said moral decay quite like a glimpse of drying linen, flapping like a flag of social carelessness. Historians still argue whether such laws were truly enforced or simply recorded to appease visiting church inspectors. There's no surviving citation for anyone imprisoned over breaches. But you wouldn't bet against a firm municipal reprimand involving parchment and a raised eyebrow. Laundry by this point had ceased to be just a domestic task. It had become a visible symbol of cleanliness, yes, but also of social obedience. Well-laundered clothes implied well-ordered lives. Neatly folded linens, the textile equivalent of emotional control. And so anything that even hinted at disorder, like underwear brushing the air over a bakery's front stoop, was met with a frown as crisp as a starched collar. Back in your imagined bed, you sigh, letting the candle's last dance mark the slow fade to black. You think about all the invisible rules you've learned over the course of this journey. The correct time to stir the potash, the optimal way to pin your linens on a windless day, the subtle difference between folding and simply hiding things under your bed and hoping for the best. You've traveled far, not in geography, but in rhythm. From icy streams and lye barrels to soft folds and whispered memories. So now, finally, we arrive. Your home is still. The embers are no longer cracking. Even the ghosts of gossip seem too tired to linger. All that's left is the hush of wool, the smell of soap, and the memory of old hands folding linens with reverence and routine. You turn onto your side, your breath slowing, your thoughts softening into fabric. And in that final moment, before dreams fully claim you, you remember one last detail. A neatly folded handkerchief tucked under a pillow, just in case. Awaiting wind down,